little about myself. I do lead our EV charging division at Edwards Electric. If you can imagine, 10 years ago, I ran an independent company. It varied in size. At the time, it was about 3 or 4 guys with boots on the ground electricians doing work, doing a renovation in your home and so on. Now I run a division where we have 3 or 4 people strictly doing EV charging designs and estimating, and for the sole purpose of planning for EV charging. That's all we do in the office. So that doesn't include the 10 to 20 people we have in the field doing the work itself of charging. So what I wanted to present for you today is a bit of a lay of the land in that regard. So a little bit more, I do work with the BC Electric Vehicle Working Group, which is, it's a group that's hosted by Technical Safety BC. And I lead the committee for contractor, designer, and engineer expectations and designs for BC. So all my committee that I lead has strata associations. It has people who've written the code for Section 86 of the EV charging. Let's see, manufacturers. We have some from Siemens and a few others across Canada, and on and on. A large, also the committee as a whole and the group as a whole has representatives of all the senior inspectors in BC and all the major cities. So it's a good group of core people that are really trying to puzzle out a lot of the EV charging issues that we're running into, and that we're trying to not inundate you with those details, right? As a consumer, as a person that's doing your work, you need to call us, you need to be insured, you're getting good service, you're getting the right advice, and you're getting a charging system for your electric vehicle. It's as simple as that. We're trying to do all the back-end work for legalities and actual equipment that's legal to use in Canada and all these other sort of things. I'm also part of a VISOA, Vancouver Island Strata Owner Association. If you go to their website, a webinar series funded by Clean BC. And I'm also very active, such as I'm going to the EV Charging Summit in Las Vegas next week now, I guess, for 4 or 5 days. So that's my position. The lay of the land, just to kind of give you a bit of what's happening across BC right now. So we've served to date over 200 MURBs and townhomes and single family homes. This represents about 15,000 owners and stalls, and which we are currently designing with and ready to do the work for, and so on. So a bit of perspective there's about 900,000 condos in BC. This 15,000 represents only 1.5% of all condos in BC. So, and we've been told between ourselves and another, partner engineering company that we work with, we do the majority of the large or small condo and strata and designs across BC. So if you can imagine, then there's probably about 800,000 owners in condos that haven't necessarily gone the steps to get EV charging. They may be thinking about it, they may be working on it within their own strata, but they're not quite at that stage yet. So we're just at that, if you can imagine that iceberg, if you will, right? So we are, as a business and as an industry, anticipating through our own data as well, this to be changing quite drastically, very quickly. And there's a number of reasons for that. We usually do see a push in data, in engagement with people around October and July, specifically stratas and MURBs, because a lot of spring and fall decisions are made with the AGMs in that time period, right? So we've also made, if you can imagine, a little bit more lay of land, we've installed about 1,000 stalls, so owner, single family home, MURBs, townhomes, 1,000 owners to have EV ready stalls. So not quite having the charger in place or whatever it might be, level 1, level 2. And that's over 3 years, okay, in the last 3 years. We are scheduled this year for another 1,000. So that's the difference, right? It's quite a bit, quite drastic. And in another kind of fact, over the last 3 years, we've installed about 300 level 2 chargers. We are anticipating 200 just this year. So again, a big push in that respect. So one of the things that does come up for a lot of people is that they see new buildings go up and they're not necessarily, the developers aren't necessarily putting in the infrastructure and so on. The city of Penticton actually, Drayden Power, who used to be with Fortis and part of our team, our provincial team, he's moved from Fortis to the city of Penticton now, and they've created a good system that we're trying to recommend for other municipalities across BC to have not just new buildings being partially ready for EV charging. They either are EV prepared or EV ready. So EV prepared means at least get in the pipe work. You know, it's simple to do when you're just putting in the concrete and so on. Might as well do it at that point. Or you go the full step to be EV ready. It is interesting to know, I've had many conversations in the last year where developers, and you might, you know, I've also been a past president of the Canadian Home Builders Association, so I get it. Developers sometimes are looking at their bottom line more than anything, but we are seeing quite a bit of developers really pushing and investing themselves to have the EV charging system, and they have that capacity in their budget to actually put in there, irrespective if there's bylaws or not. So we are seeing that coming down the pipe. For example, I just had a good meeting with West Hills, where they have 130 condo units, and they are looking to do the whole shebang, right? And there was no bylaws at the time to actually do that. So it's quite amazing to see that. You know, they are putting that effort in there. It is then a competitive advantage, right? It goes back to money a bit, right? You know, because it is now a checkbox for realtors going into your building saying, do you have some sort of EV charging capability, right? So another interesting statistic is on the average for our installed EV ready owners. So we're talking now mainly MERBs, not single family homes. When we make a building EV ready, that means that all the infrastructure is there so that they can put a level 2 charger in. About 28% opt to have an actual EV charger at that time. Okay, now that data is mixed in with the developers, right? Because they usually put in a bit more. They're not really sure, it's more of a selling feature, right? So it could be down to about 25%, but that's quite significant, right? In that data. Doesn't mean that these owners, though, that are getting these chargers actually have an EV. Well, sometimes not. There is 3 or 4 situations here. Either they do have an electric vehicle already and they're wanting to get a charger right away, or they have one on order and hopefully get one in the next 20 years, who knows. They anticipate buying one in the next 5 years, or lastly, they actually have the unit, the charger installed just for the resale value and to take advantage of the current rebate. All right, so that's the lay of the land of what we're seeing in the industry, and it's very fast-paced. There's a lot happening. It's hard to keep up. We're continuing to add to our team to do that. So I want to now just kind of shift a little into the rebates, because rebates usually push the envelope as to the decision-making process to single-family homes or even townhomes or condos. So, all right, I just wanted to touch now upon and transition to rebates. So these rebates will be available for a number of years as far as we see. Yeah, but we do anticipate the rebates, just like any electrical rebates in the past, such as LED lighting rebates. The LED lighting rebates were available 20 odd years ago. I remember it was big news. You could transition from your old T12 lighting to LED, and there'd be a good rate of return, especially with the rebates available. It's gone to a point now after so many years that this rebate program actually still exists, but it still exists to a point where it might as well not. And what we see is the same sort of situation with the either vehicle. I'm not going to get into vehicle rebates. It's not my specialty, but we're talking about rebates to help with the EV charging themselves. But we do see the dialing back, kind of like we see with countries like Norway, who have 80% of their sales as electric vehicles. Are we going to get close to that within 5-7 years? Because 2035 is our deadline when we cannot, our mandate from our government that we cannot buy a new gas vehicle. Are we going to see a dialing back of the rebates before then, right? Because that is what we're seeing with a lot of government entities when they have rebates. There's a critical mass of people that do take advantage of the rebate program to a point where the government will pat themselves on the back and say, okay, we've done our job, let's start dialing it back, right? That's just what will happen. So at this time, they will start dialing back. I personally anticipate that in a good 4 to 5 years, that's when that point might start really dialing back. Who knows though? No one does know at this point. But there's interesting points of why the rebate program in BC will continue. Obviously, and I won't get to it because I'm sure there is conversation within the Victoria EV Club about the provincial targets and the push for EVs and so on. But there is more subtle things, and the most subtle and important item is carbon credits. Okay. The Ministry of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation since 2022 is now in charge of the Clean BC rebate program. Okay. Now, why is this important? It's because they also control the carbon credits for BC. All right. So if you install a level 2 charger on your property and you are a strata or a type of building that has over 4 units, you must register those chargers and report its yearly kilowatt hour usage. If you do not, you're not in compliance and will be fined. It is a law, right? So it's a bit of a issue though, because it's something stratas aren't used to, right? Because you now have to become what's called a Part 3 fuel supplier. A lot of people that I know that are stratas are doing this, they are doing it themselves. But it takes a bit of work and time and effort. And who are you designating to do that? And how are you going to sell the credits, right? Because the only people buying carbon credits are the large oil companies in BC, right? So how is this making our earth greener? I don't know, but hey, it's incentive. It makes sense in some way down the line. So that's why it's a big deal that the rebates will be available, because the ministry is also supporting carbon credit. They want to ensure people in MURBs get on the train so that, eventually they can have EV charging systems that are viable for their building. We're just talking about MURBs and single family homes and providing the pathways initially for new construction. For MURBs, the problem though is, and this is a very important point, that I try to stay far away from rules and bylaws, but I know enough to stay out of the way of them. One thing that's very important with new buildings that are produced as condos or townhomes is that a strata is not able to legally create a new bylaw for another 1.5 years after the building is completed. So that means if the developer has not created systems in place for the strata and the condo and association to manage their own system that they have, they may be out of pocket, or they may not have a system that they actually like or they want, right? So this is a very important point that developers need to address, that we help developers with on our end as much as we can to ensure that they provide that pathway so that it makes sense for the strata that is overtaking the building eventually. Just talk about just lay of the land when it comes to fleets. So, it kind of goes back to talking about, how we as individuals and owners, we're looking to get an electric vehicle, or we have an electric vehicle. But what about the businesses that have, like ourselves, we have 20 vehicles on the road. We did a lot of research and work in the last 2 years to try to start changing our fleet so that it is electric, right? And it is just business-wise, it is not feasible at this point. And I'm sure that you recognize the basic reason: we just can't get vehicles. That's the first reason. We have 5 F-150 Lightnings on order, and we can get one if we wanted to pay another $20,000. That's great. Wow, what a deal. It doesn't make business sense at this time for us to move forward. So, but why I just bring it up is that transition is and will take time. The capacity is not there yet, but once the FedEx, Amazon companies, the large companies, get their orders filled of electric vehicles in North America, that will start trickling down to us and municipalities. The municipalities right now, like I believe, a couple of you were at the meeting with the CRD, where the city of Victoria and the CRD were there presenting their start of their EV fleet. They are mandated by policy to do this. They are struggling to make it work, and to make it work in budget, right? It is no question that the maintenance and the cost of these EVs are great. That's not a question. It's actually getting the product, and for a reasonable price that still fits within their budget, as well as their tools and so on that they use within their building as well. So that's a bit of a lay of the land there. It is coming. I think it's like any of us within BC and within the Victoria EV Club, that we're very positive about it. It's just going to take time, and we just keep on pushing that. Okay. So when it comes now to single family homes, I'm going to talk about, to help probably many of you in this discussion of what's coming up, and also to kind of tee up with what Chris is probably going to talk about. Just so it's clear, there's no conflict of interest here. Swift Energy and Chris, they're our go-to team when it comes to solar. They're, in our eyes, they're the leaders. So when it comes to solar installations, batteries, working with the homeowner to see, what's your capacity and so on, we rely on them, right? They are the experts in that field, right? We know our lane. But there's a few nuances that are coming out that is very interesting, that will change or, kind of put a different spin on your potential solar anticipated needs as well. So one of the things that's coming out, and because I'm thankfully in position talking directly with senior inspectors across BC, they're now working on a bulletin that will come out shortly. It should have come out about 2 weeks ago, but it's not there yet. What this bulletin will do will allow a single family home to acquire your BC Hydro information to prove how much power you're actually using, okay? So that you can increase your power usage with EV charging. So this also has to do with showing what you need for solar as well. So this is now going to be a bulletin that will be quasi-law then for electrical contractors and solar installers. So if you don't mind, I'm going to, if I can share my screen here.
Yep, go ahead.
I can go through a process that I can show all of your people on this call how to actually get your load report. So I'm going to go through the whole process here, everyone. So you can see I'm going to BC Hydro. Sorry if it's a small font here. I'll try to, no, we'll just move on. So everyone in BC Hydro that has a hydro account, you're able to go to this website at BC Hydro and put in your information so that you can pay your bills or actually collect your data of your own home. So I'm just going to bring up one here. So this is probably something that all of you have seen before, and I'll see if I can zoom in a bit. I apologize. Zoom. There we go. Okay. So the area you want to go to now, and again, remember, this is only available and only applicable once this bulletin comes out. Okay. So you're able to actually get detailed consumption of your home through here. Okay, and it'll show you a little snippet, if you will, but where we want to actually go is this little area on the right-hand side called export data. Okay, so once you're here, you have to, you put in your date range. And why this is super important here, everyone, is that under Canadian Electrical Code, I believe it's 81086, there is a little line, there's lots of little lines, I should say, but that states that to add further loads, such as EV charging to your home, if you're able to prove your actual usage of the last 12 months, that can be utilized as your baseline, if you will. Okay, so that's where we're coming from here. This bulletin coming out is showing what factors you need to put to this information. Okay, so the date range is a year. We'll go back to about March 19th to about today. And what we need is hourly data. Okay, so this is going to give us all the data we need for the past year, every single hour. So the data that you get is every hour for a whole year. And what we'll do is we'll just graphize this. This is something that, you know, I'm not sure in the bulletin they will allow a homeowner to do, but it is simple enough to acquire in this way, and you can send it to any electrical contractor to analyze, such as ourselves. So I'm just going to put it in a different sheet here. There we go. So what we're seeing here is my own home past hourly usage for the whole year. And this is really important to note that what it's showing us is the kilowatt hour usage. So it's showing that hour period, how much you use within that hour. Now that's an average, okay? So there might be spikes up or lower, right? So the bulletin that will be coming out will state something to the effect that if you take your maximum used amount, let's call it 7 kilowatts, and you put a factor of about 25%, that is your actual load of your home that you can utilize to add further load to your building. Okay, what is that representing? That's only about 36 amps. We have 150 amp service. If we did what's called a calculated load, we would be just at our maximum amount. There's no way I can add an EV charger, right? I was thinking, well, there's options. I can put what's called a DCC unit that kind of measures my power, mitigates the power going to the charger, kind of chokes it off and whatnot. But through this saves me all that money.
And Lee, this kind of goes back to the long coffee we had a few months ago, where, you know, we're looking at, we have all these really efficient refrigerators and freezers and all those incandescent lights that, you know, you've got a string, 16 amp string for your upstairs lights, and those are all LED now. And, you know, let's stretch it out. You might be using 5 amps. So there's a whole lot of, you know, not used amperage on your panel. And this is exactly what you've done here is why, you know, we're a lot more efficient now.
Exactly. And that's what we're seeing in MERBs. For MERBs, we're seeing usually about 40% actively used at any one time, you know, at the highest point for MERBs. We have to put, you know, a safety factor of about 25 to 50% on that. So this bulletin, though, is specific to nothing but single family homes. That doesn't mean single families with suites. It's just one single family home with one family, not with extra suites attached and so on, okay? There may be more bulletins coming out after that. The problem is, and I completely understand when they've explained this to me, they said, well, you know, Lee, we just can't necessarily trust that this data is 100% accurate, right? Because BC Hydro has not stated that it is, right? There is this disconnect that we're trying to push BC Hydro as an industry to give us accurate data they are capable of, but they are not willing because there's just margins of error, right? That they don't want to be called back upon. But as an industry, we are pushing hydro because we're pointing to the government saying, your own people who create the policies that you have to abide by are pushing EV charging. We need this data. Okay, so this has come out of that. So great news for single family homeowners. This is easy to acquire. It is, once the bulletin comes out, read it carefully. I think they're going to put a margin of safety of 25%. It could be up to 50%. As you saw with this, even if it's 50%, we call it 45 amps for my home. I have still, you know, about 100 amps or so remaining. That's plenty for a 60 amp level 2 charger if I really wanted to, right? So yeah, but before this bulletin, it would not have been possible to have that. All right. So that's all I wanted to share there. A couple other things I wanted to talk about is briefly is the townhome and MURBs. You know what we do for that. We have to get a special BC Hydro load report. That's through a form that we help the client fill out and we process on their behalf. Kind of works the same situation. But it's a fine line. It's a weird situation where we can put a 50% margin of error on the data we get from hydro, and it still leaves plenty of room. But there is no official wording within the Canadian Electrical Code right now of that 50% or this margin, right? So it's just an interesting little thing that we're dealing with in the industry. I did just want to lastly talk about level 1 charging. We talked about on the break here with level 1 charging is completely fine. You know, I use level 1 charging in my home. I do most of my charging at work. We have a level 2 charger. I come into work most of the time, but I only plug in maybe once a week, right? That's all I need. And I travel extensively. I only have a Kona that has about 480 kilometers of range, but you know, what we're finding in industry that in our own discussions with people is that you use far less than you actually think you do. Now, the problem with level 1 charging, I'm just going to hit some highlights here. Completely fine for single family home, not a problem, right? If only you need a 7-8 kilometer charging your battery per hour, that's great. You know, you charge overnight and get 60 to 80 kilometers of charge. Awesome. No problem with that. You know, most people only need to travel 30 kilometers, you know, if that. The problem is with larger buildings. There's an article recently in City Victoria or Times Colonist actually of someone in Vancouver, condo association in Vancouver, that had a new building. They installed 6 level 2 chargers, and unfortunately they also installed some level 1 charging for some people. So the people with electric vehicles are like, well, I'm just going to use a trickle charger and there's no fee. Well, there has to be some way that your strata is compensated for electricity. You know, nothing can be free because people who are not having electric vehicles, they do not want to subsidize your usage, obviously. So there is a cost associated to that. The problem with level 1, though, is that the cost of the installation is just as much or more. It's actually 2 times the amount of cost for level 1 charging from level 2 infrastructure, not the chargers on the infrastructure. It's about 2 times the cost, and it uses about 40% more power, the level 1 chargers, than a good designed level 2 load sharing system for MRBs. So that's a huge issue. If it's 40% or so more power that you have to allocate, your building may not have that. And there's demand charges and so on that you have to account for. With level 1, it's very, very expensive to also what we call demand charges, deal with mitigating those costs of demand charges. You can't necessarily control level 1 without just having a relay that just tells it to turn off or on, right? And of course, the monitoring of level 1 is not there as much as it can be with level 2 chargers. I'm not poo-pooing it at all. It's an option, and every building that we deal with, we give them all the options. It's up to the owners to decide X, Y, or Z. Not up to us. Yeah, and when it does come up to, like, if you included the rebates on the chargers themselves, though, when you have level 2 infrastructure and then the chargers, it ends up being about the same amount of money if the rebates were on the chargers. A lot of times, though, if you have a large building, you can't get all the rebates on chargers because there's a limited amount per year, right? With MRBs, you only get about $14,000 per year per strata. That'll only cover maybe 10, 11 chargers, but that amount is renewed every fiscal government year, every rebate year, right? So it's just something that we deal with our clients. They put in infrastructure, they buy maybe 10 chargers, and then next fiscal year, as April 1st, which is coming up, that's why it's very busy for us, they do another round of 10, up to 10 chargers. So, and maybe when people are considering, one thing I just saw in my notes here, I wanted to just touch upon, and maybe Chris, you can expand upon this. I know through my own connections with the people who write the Canadian Electrical Code and CSA, that they are changing rules right now coming up for battery storage systems. We don't know what those changes quite are yet. So I don't know if that's something that will affect. Again, when it comes to battery storage, it's kind of, we rely on the experts like Chris and their team to understand that, but we do keep an eye on what's coming down the pipe. So it's mainly to do with storage of the units themselves and make sure they have proper ventilation and whatnot, because they do off gas.
I'll hop in here for a quick one, Lee. Heat pumps, what impact do they have on your power panel?
Oh dear. Well, no, it's a great question. And, when a lot of people, such as townhomes require a different animal of reviewing your power system. They kind of fall in between the single family and MRB. They're not covered by the EV Ready Plan design system. If you have private and garaged homes. And what we're finding is, whether it be townhome, single family home, or MRBs, whatever we do in regards to finding the actual usage of your building, your home, it's not just for the addition of EV charging. This number is potentially available for heat pump systems that you do not have, that you need to add to your building. So it is rated under the Canadian Electrical Code as 100%, just like EV charging is. So if you have 70 amps available and you have a 40 amp charger, well, then you only have 30 amps available for a heat pump. It's just, it's XXY. Saying that, if you install a heat pump and you utilize it for a year within your building, because you need to prove with this information that I showed you of what you can gain from BC Hydro to acquire the information to coincide with the bulletin, you need to prove what has changed or not changed within your home. For example, if you have a 5-bedroom home and all of your children left 2 years ago, you had 3 children, your usage is different than if they came back because they couldn't make it in the world and your usage is completely different. You have to prove these sort of things. So when it comes to heat pumps, what we're seeing is that it's just another factor that buildings are looking at to see, do we have the capacity as well for heat pumps? They usually work with a mechanical contractor to provide an estimate as to the future usage for large buildings or a single family home even. We just get the kilowatt usage that it would require and add it to the factors. What we are seeing with larger buildings, of course, is the push to remove natural gas systems from buildings coming up. It's not necessarily law yet, but we are seeing that whispering. For new buildings, obviously, they're trying to push it right out, of course. But for existing buildings, they may put more pressure upon them to remove their natural gas systems, which then needs to be a factor that we have to allow for EV charging as well.